Prisoner asks for his dog before execution. The warden laughs. Until Chuck shows up. The hallway buzzed with a low hum of flickering lights and the dull echoes of heavy boots walking the concrete. Somewhere in the bowels of Greystone Correctional Facility, a man waited to die. Prisoner number 0427 sat still in his cell, back straight, hands clasped, staring through the thin sliver of reinforced glass. His real name was Eli Walker, and he had 3 days left. He didn't count them in sunrises. Not anymore. Time here moved differently. Slower, quieter, sometimes crueler. A few cells down, someone cried themselves to sleep. Across the block, someone cursed at the wall like it had done something personal. But Eli, he didn't do either. He just sat, silent, thinking about a pair of brown eyes and the sound of paws on wood. Her name was Bessie, a mutt, loyal, gentle, his. He hadn't seen her in almost 7 years. But in here, it was her face, not his mother's, not his brother's, that kept him breathing. In the warden's office, a single page rested on the desk. The request was short. Before my execution, I'd like to see my dog. Bessie. One last time. Warden Malcolm Kessler leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching into a smirk. This guy serious? The young guard in front of him nodded, uncomfortable. He's asked every day this week, sir. Even offered to give up his final meal if he could see her instead. Kessler barked a laugh. Tell him this is a prison, not a kennel. He's not asking to keep her, just to see her. 5 minutes. Said she's all he has left. They all have something left. A dog, a song, a childhood sob story. Doesn't change where he's going. The warden tossed the page in the trash. Request denied. Eli knew it was coming. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. The guard who brought him the news, Johnson, one of the kinder ones, didn't look him in the eye. I'm sorry, man. Eli nodded. It's okay. I didn't really think they would. He smiled. That's what broke Johnson a little. The smile. Like a man who had nothing left and still tried to comfort someone else. That night, Eli lay back on his cot and stared at the ceiling. In his mind, he was on the porch again, that beat-up swing creaking beneath him. Bessie curled at his feet. The sound of crickets, the warmth of summer air, and the soft weight of peace. It felt like another life. Because it was. He'd made mistakes. Terrible ones. That much he didn't deny. But not even the worst people should have to leave this world without one moment of comfort. One moment of being human. Just one more time, girl, he whispered into the dark. 300 miles away, at the edge of a forest road, Chuck Norris poured himself a cup of black coffee and watched the sun rise over the hills. A weathered photo sat on the table beside him. In it, a younger Eli Walker, maybe 20, with a shaggy-haired dog resting her head on his lap. Bessie. Chuck had taken that photo. Back then, Eli wasn't a prisoner. He was just a kid with too much pain and no idea how to carry it. Chuck had known his father. A good man. The kind who gave more than he had, and still came up short. When he died, Chuck checked in on the boy, not out of duty, but because something about Eli reminded him of himself. Stubborn, angry, but not broken. Until one day he was. The headlines came later. Eli arrested. Tried. Sentenced. Chuck never visited. He figured the boy didn't want to see the look in his eyes. But now something had shifted. He received a letter. No return address. Just a note. All he wants is to see her. Chuck folded the letter, poured out the rest of the coffee, and got in the truck. Back at Greystone, Warden Kessler stared at his monitor, blinking in disbelief. Are you kidding me? The intercom buzzed again. Sir, we verified. Chuck Norris is here. In the lobby. With a dog. Kessler stood slowly, straightening his jacket. Well, let's give him the warmest bureaucratic welcome possible. In the front waiting room, Chuck stood calmly, hand resting on Bessie's leash. She was older now, a little slower, but when the sliding doors opened, her ears perked. Chuck didn't say a word as the guards approached. He didn't need to. The lead officer cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Norris, sir, we don't usually allow animals inside the facility. I'm not here to ask. He handed over an official document. A state-level override signed by a federal judge. Kessler had just been outranked and outmaneuvered. 10 minutes later, the cell block door buzzed open. Eli stood at the far end, stunned. He stepped forward, slowly at first, like he was afraid it was a trick. Then Bessie barked once. That was all it took. Eli dropped to his knees as she lunged into his arms, licking his face, tail wagging like it had never stopped. His fingers tangled in her fur, his head buried in her neck. He sobbed without shame. Chuck stood just outside the cell, watching, not saying a word. Warden Kessler appeared a moment later. "This is a breach of every protocol we have." Chuck turned. "Then maybe you need new protocols. You don't get to walk in here and decide what." "I didn't come to decide. I came to remind you what mercy looks like." The two men stared at each other. Neither blinked. "You're going to leave this prison," Kessler growled, "and he's still going to die." Chuck leaned in slightly. But today he lived. Later that night, Chuck sat quietly in the warden's parking lot, Bessie resting in the seat beside him. He didn't drive away. Not yet, because something Kessler said stayed with him. He's still going to die. And something about the way the warden said it didn't sit right. Chuck narrowed his eyes and whispered to no one, "Unless something's wrong with that sentence." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Chuck finally pulled away from the prison parking lot. Bessie lay curled in the passenger's seat, her chin resting on his leg. The visit had gone as planned. Eli had held her, cried into her fur, said his goodbye. But something about the warden's tone still echoed in Chuck's head. "You're going to leave this prison, and he's still going to die. Not he's been sentenced, or it's the law." There had been something personal behind it. Cold. Certain. Too certain. Chuck didn't deal in hunches. But this one wouldn't let go. He drove through the night to the closest town with a diner and a phone booth. The waitress recognized him immediately, but said nothing. That was good. Fame got in the way of listening. He ordered coffee and pulled out a notebook, flipping through details he hadn't read in years, because Eli's case was old news. Headlines from a decade ago. Brutal crime. Open and shut. Except now, Chuck was looking with different eyes. Eli Walker had been convicted for the murder of a gas station attendant during an armed robbery gone wrong. The evidence? A security tape that showed a man with Eli's build, similar jacket, and no alibi. A bloody glove found 2 blocks from his house. A gun with partial prints. But there were cracks. The timestamps didn't match his last phone ping. The witness recanted their testimony 2 weeks later. The defense attorney? Suspended 6 months after the trial. And yet, death row. Chuck circled 2 names in his notes. Detective Haver and Warden Kessler. One had made the arrest. The other had pushed the expedited execution order through just this year. Something wasn't right. Back at Greystone, Eli sat in his cell, replaying the moment over and over. Bessie's bark. Her warmth. Chuck's face. "Why did he come?" he whispered. He hadn't seen Chuck in years. Not since his father's funeral. And yet, here he was, fighting for a dog, and maybe something more. The next day, Chuck visited the courthouse. He walked straight to the archives, flashed an old badge, honorary but heavy with history, and requested Eli's full trial transcript. The clerk hesitated, but complied. 3 boxes were wheeled out. Chuck read for hours, and with every page, the cracks grew wider. A key witness disappeared from the record. Video footage had missing frames, conveniently during the key moment of the robbery. The blood on the glove wasn't DNA tested. It was presumed. Chuck closed the file. "They didn't just get it wrong," he muttered. "They made sure no one could prove it." Later that afternoon, he found Detective Haver at a retirement party in a small-town bar. The man had aged grayer, slower, but his eyes were still sharp. Chuck walked up to the bar beside him. Didn't sit. Just said, "You railroaded a kid." Haver froze, then turned slowly. "Excuse me, Eli Walker. You knew he didn't do it." Haver's jaw clenched. A pause. Then, he had motive. He had history. He fit the tape. He had holes in his case you buried. Haver's voice dropped. "You think it was my call? You think Kessler didn't make sure that conviction went through clean?" Chuck leaned in low. "Then maybe I'm talking to the wrong man." He turned to walk. Haver stopped him. "You dig too deep. Norris, you'll find out why they want him gone so fast." Chuck stared back. Good. That night, Chuck sat at a motel desk, laptop open, Bessie asleep on the bed behind him. He cross-referenced prison budgets, campaign donations, and trial timelines. It all lined up too perfectly. Kessler had recently secured funding for a private expansion, one that required full state cooperation and clean closure of existing capital cases. Eli's was the last pending execution on the books. Meanwhile, back at Greystone, Eli got a message slipped under his tray at dinner. A napkin, scrawled in red pen. Don't talk to Norris. It'll make it worse. No name, no signature, just threat. Chuck returned to Greystone the next morning. He asked to speak to Eli privately. Kessler denied the request. Chuck didn't flinch. You sure that's the fight you want to pick? Kessler smirked. You had your moment. Now walk away. Chuck stared at him. Calm, quiet, then said, your clock's ticking. You just don't hear it yet. He turned to leave. Outside, a car pulled up fast. An envelope was tossed onto the pavement. No driver visible. Chuck picked it up. Inside, a photo of the gas station before the murder. A blurry figure at the counter. But it wasn't Eli. And in the corner, Warden Kessler. Chuck folded the photo and whispered, Got you. The photo burned in Chuck's hand like a match waiting to catch. Warden Kessler, in the corner, at the gas station, before the murder. But Eli had never mentioned that. Neither had the case file. The warden wasn't listed in any reports, statements, or testimony, which meant one thing. He was never supposed to be seen. Chuck knew what that meant. There was more than just a bad arrest. This was a setup. Back in his motel room, Chuck laid the photo on the bed and started comparing timestamps. The date printed at the bottom corner didn't match what the court had presented as the time of the robbery. In fact, it was the day before. Kessler was already there, Chuck muttered. Maybe surveilling, maybe staging, maybe worse. He needed answers. But more than that, he needed time, and Greystone wasn't giving him much of it. Eli now had 48 hours left, and every minute that passed was a minute closer to a needle. Chuck's next stop was the county records office. He requested footage from the gas station security archives, which should have been sealed after the trial. What he got instead was a line of redacted documents, and a clerk who wouldn't stop looking over her shoulder. I'm sorry, she said. Those tapes were destroyed in evidence storage fire 6 years ago. Chuck raised an eyebrow. A fire? Yes, sir. Just that one room. Only that case. Convenient. I really can't help you. Chuck leaned in. Then help someone else. Where's the backup copy? The woman paused. Then, with a whisper, old DA's assistant, Janice Leeds. She fought the ruling. Got shut down, but she kept a box from the case. At her house. That was all he needed. Janice Leeds lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, in a house full of old books and half-drunk coffee mugs. She didn't open the door immediately, but when she did, her eyes went wide. Chuck Norris? Need a minute of your time, ma'am. Is this about Eli Walker? That stopped him. You kept it. They thought I was crazy. Said I was defending a killer. But I knew something was off. She led him inside and dug through a metal filing cabinet. Pulled out a box labeled, Walker, do not destroy. Inside, transcripts, photos, witness notes, and most importantly, a VHS tape. That's the original footage, she said. I digitized a copy, just in case. But this is the real thing. Chuck didn't waste a second. He popped it into a battered player in her living room and hit play. The grainy footage rolled. Eli's supposed look-alike entered the store. Same jacket, same build, but not Eli. The man turned, and for half a second, his face caught the light. And it wasn't him. Chuck paused it, zoomed in, and behind the counter, another face, nervous, sweating, looking at something just outside frame. Kessler. He was there, Janice said. He saw it happen. He wasn't just a witness, Chuck growled. He made it happen. Meanwhile, back at Greystone, Warden Kessler stood at his office window, sipping from a heavy glass of bourbon. His secretary entered, phone in hand. He's asking questions again, this time at the courthouse. And the DA's assistant. Kessler exhaled hard. Then it's time we remind Mr. Norris this isn't a movie. Should I notify internal security? No, he said slowly, darkly. Notify the governor's office. Tell them Chuck Norris is interfering with state-sanctioned protocol. If they won't stop him, we will. Chuck didn't slow down. With the tape and files in hand, he called Dana, the investigative reporter who'd helped him before. She answered on the second ring. Chuck, You only call when something's on fire. Because this one's already burning. He explained everything. Fast. I need eyes. I need pressure. And I need it now. How much do you want to expose? Chuck looked down at the pause video. All of it. That night, Dana ran the story live on her platform. Footage of a tape. Voiceover outlining the contradictions. The photo of Kessler in the background of the original robbery. And Chuck's voice, calm and firm. If this man dies, the state kills more than just a prisoner. It kills the truth. And I won't let that happen. The story spread like wildfire. Hashtags. Comments. Outrage. The governor's office issued a vague statement. Greystone Prison went into lockdown. And Eli? He sat in his cell, watching it all unfold on a tiny TV above the hallway. For the first time in years, he felt hope. Back at Greystone, the lights flickered. An emergency order was faxed to the warden's desk. A stay of execution? No. It was a push forward, a rush timeline. The new time? 24 hours. Chuck received the news at the motel. He didn't curse. He didn't pace. He just stood up slowly. Then I've got 24 hours to tear the rest of it down. And with that, he grabbed his coat, nodded to Bessie, and walked out into the storm. The motel clock read 11:27 p.m. when Chuck closed the folder on the bed. His hands rested on it a moment longer, steady, as if holding down the weight of everything it contained and everything it threatened to expose. In the corner, Bessie stirred, sensing the shift in his breathing. He was no longer planning. He was moving. The next morning came gray and heavy with the kind of silence that only precedes storms. It wasn't raining yet, but the sky wore that tight expression of something waiting to snap. 24 hours. That's what the warden had left Chuck. Not enough time for courts, committees, or polite requests, but just enough time for justice. Chuck's first stop wasn't the prison. It was the State Records Building, a sterile tower of paper trails and protocols. A friend in archives owed him a favor. Chuck handed over a USB and the hard copy of Detective Haver's confession. He spoke only one sentence. Timestamp it. Secure it. Send it to every oversight committee on your mailing list. The archivist looked at him with wide eyes. Are you saying? I'm saying if this doesn't stop what's about to happen, it's going to expose everything afterward. Make sure that trail burns hot. The man nodded, and Chuck walked out without another word. Back at Greystone, Warden Kessler stood before the glass of the sealed execution chamber. His reflection stared back, smug, unreadable. Behind him, the chamber team stood ready. The machine had been tested. The 4 lines prepped. The air too cold, too quiet. We're moving forward, Kessler said. There's a court order on hold. One of the techs said nervously. Shouldn't we wait? If they want him alive, they'll get here before the needle drops. The tech swallowed hard. At the same time, Chuck parked his truck outside the Attorney General's office. Inside, Dana stood with a USB drive in hand, the original footage already copied to cloud backups. This is every piece of evidence we have. Confession, timeline, photos, case discrepancies. The assistant AG hesitated. The governor hasn't approved a full override. Chuck stepped forward. We don't need her permission. We have proof of a conspiracy to execute an innocent man. That's your jurisdiction now. Dana added. And if you delay 1 more hour, we're going public with your name attached to it. That got him moving. Within 10 minutes, the order to halt the execution was signed, stamped with the seal of the highest legal office in the state. It was real, official, but time? Still running. Back on the road, Chuck drove with Bessie beside him, her head out the window, nose catching wind. Almost there, girl, he muttered. Hold on. His phone buzzed. Dana, they're stalling at Greystone. Not for long. How do you know? Chuck glanced at the glove box. Inside, the last unopened letter from Eli's father. Because I've seen this before, and I've never let it end the same way. Greystone Prison, 1:38 p.m. The outer gate remained locked. 2 guards approached Chuck's truck. You can't be here. Chuck stepped out, calm as always. I'm not here for you. He held out the order. The younger guard read it, his hand trembling slightly as he recognized the seal. He has every right to present this, the older one said, surprised. This is federal override. Then open the gate. Inside, Kessler watched the security camera footage. "Do not open it," he ordered. "He's bluffing." "Sir, that man is not in charge of this prison." Chuck looked into the camera above the gate. He knew Kessler was watching, so he stepped closer and said, flatly, "You know what happens if you ignore a federal stay. You're not protecting yourself, you're burying yourself. Open this gate, or I will." Inside the control room, Kessler's hands twitched. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, outside press is starting to arrive. Channel 7 just pulled up." Another pause. "And I just got word. The AG's office sent a chopper with a marshal. ETA 10 minutes. Kessler paled. Chuck's timing was perfect. Finally, the gate creaked open. Chuck walked in with the folder under one arm and Bessie close behind, tail low, alert. Inside, guards stared. Some nodded. Some stepped aside without a word. Inmates pressed their faces to the bars, murmuring as he passed. "That's him, the legend, the man who doesn't lose." In the warden's office, Chuck laid the documents on the desk. Kessler stood, trembling with anger. "You've made a mockery of this entire system." Chuck stared him down. "You did that. I just turned the lights on. He's a criminal. The court found him guilty, and now the court found you out." Chuck leaned closer. "This isn't about Eli anymore. It's about you. About what you covered up. About how far you'd go to silence the truth." Kessler snapped. "You don't know anything about sacrifice. About doing what needs to be done to keep this machine running." "No," Chuck said, voice low. "But I know what happens when good men stay quiet." Kessler reached into a drawer fast. But Chuck was faster. In one move, he slammed the drawer shut and shoved Kessler back. A black pistol clattered to the ground. Silence. Then footsteps. A U.S. Marshal stepped into the room, followed by two officers. "Warden Kessler," the Marshal said, badge raised. "You're under investigation for conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and attempted unlawful execution." Kessler opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Chuck turned to the officers. "Get Eli Walker out of that cell." The Marshal nodded. "Already on it." Outside the window, the clouds finally broke. But for the first time that day, the rain felt clean. The heavy metal door creaked open, and Eli Walker blinked into the harsh white light of the corridor. He hadn't walked freely in nearly a decade. His legs stiffened instinctively, like they didn't believe what was happening. A guard, not one of Kessler's loyal men, but a fresh face, motioned him forward. "Come on, Walker. You're not staying here." Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a dream. And standing at the end of the hall, arms folded, face carved from stone, was Chuck Norris. Bessie barked once from behind Chuck's legs, her tail wagging. Eli's knees almost buckled. As they walked through the winding halls of Greystone, the other inmates stirred behind their bars. Some whispered. Some cheered softly. Others just watched, silent witnesses to the impossible. Chuck didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone sent a message louder than any words could. The truth survived. When they passed the execution chamber, Eli slowed. Through the window, he saw the gurney where he was supposed to die. The straps. The needles. The final destination, already prepared. He stared at it for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned away and kept walking. Outside, the fresh air hit him like a punch to the chest. The first real breath he'd taken in years tasted like rain, pine, and freedom. He staggered slightly. Chuck caught his arm, steadying him with a grip firm and patient. "One step at a time," Chuck said simply. Eli nodded. Bessie barked again, circling his legs, whining joyfully. He dropped to his knees and pulled her close, burying his face in her scruffy fur, letting the tears fall freely now, without shame. For the first time in years, Eli Walker wasn't a number. He was a man again, and he wasn't alone. In the parking lot, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Walker, how do you feel?" "Chuck, what happens now?" Chuck didn't answer them. Instead, he guided Eli carefully to his truck, the same old battered pickup that had waded through everything. Bessie jumped into the back seat, tail thudding happily against the seat. Eli hesitated before climbing in. He turned to look back, at the towering fences, the floodlights, the cold towers. The place that had stolen a decade of his life. "How do you forgive this?" he whispered. Chuck followed his gaze. You don't, he said. You outlive it. And with that, they drove away, slow at first, then faster, the prison shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the misting rain. Hours later, they sat around a quiet diner table in a town 2 counties away. Bessie snoozed under the table, one paw twitching as she dreamed. Eli stared into his cup of black coffee, still overwhelmed by the strange weight of breathing free air. Chuck sipped his own coffee, calm, unbothered, watching Eli with those steady, patient eyes. "You saved me," Eli said finally, voice hoarse. "No," Chuck answered. "You saved yourself. You just needed a little backup." Eli shook his head. "No one else would have fought. No one else would have cared." Chuck leaned forward slightly. "There's always someone who cares. Sometimes you just have to give them a reason to find you." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of understanding. In that diner, they weren't a prisoner and a legend. They were just 2 men who knew what it meant to lose everything and still get back up. Back at Greystone, Warden Kessler sat in a tiny holding cell of his own. No windows, no whiskey, no power, only the clink of keys and the sound of his own breathing. He had spent decades looking down on the broken, and now he was one of them. The marshal slid the indictment papers through the bars without a word. Kessler didn't bother reading them. He knew what they said. Conspiracy, evidence tampering, attempted unlawful execution, abuse of power. His empire, built on silence and control, had crumbled in one thunderous, inescapable collapse. He slumped back against the wall, realizing too late what Eli had learned through pain. Real power isn't control. It's integrity. The next morning, headlines exploded nationwide. Execution halted after new evidence emerges. Chuck Norris exposes prison corruption. Warden faces federal charges. But Chuck ignored the noise. He didn't pose for interviews, didn't demand credit, didn't stay for the cameras. He just sat quietly with Eli and Bessie, letting the slow return of normal life wash over them. At one point, a waitress approached their table, holding a slip of paper. "Excuse me, Mr. Norris, someone left this for you." Chuck took it. A simple note, scrawled in rough handwriting. "Thank you for fighting for those who can't fight for themselves." No signature. Chuck folded the note carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. Some battles didn't end with a bang. They ended with a quiet nod and a life reclaimed. Later, Eli leaned against the truck, staring out at a field stretching wide under the clean morning sky. "I don't know what comes next," he said softly. Chuck stood beside him. "You rebuild," he said, "brick by brick, day by day." Eli looked down. "What if I don't deserve it?" Chuck's voice was firm, not harsh, but unwavering. "It's not about deserving it. It's about doing something with it." He reached into the cab, pulling out a worn leather leash, Bessie's, and handed it to Eli. "Start with her." Eli smiled through tears. "Yeah," he whispered. "Okay." They stood there for a long moment, 2 shadows on the edge of a new day. And somewhere in the distance, the future waited, raw, uncertain, but real. Free, because in a world full of men who forget mercy, sometimes all it takes is one man who remembers. As they climbed into the truck to leave, Chuck's phone buzzed. A message. No sender. Just a sentence. "There are more like him. Waiting." Chuck read it once, tucked the phone away, and started the engine. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. But for now, they had a road ahead of them, a dog in the back seat, and a second chance at life. And that was enough. The engine hummed beneath them, steady as a heartbeat. Chuck kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on the window ledge as the truck rolled down the empty 2-lane highway. Beside him, Eli sat stiffly, staring out at the open fields blurring past, freedom stretching wide and endless, but feeling heavier than the cell he'd just left. Bessie dozed in the back seat, her tail occasionally thumping against the worn leather. Neither man spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Out here, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was healing. But even freedom had weight, and Eli could feel it pressing down on him minute by minute. The first town they passed was called Dry Hollow. A few dusty streets, a handful of storefronts, a gas station with one working pump. Chuck pulled in without a word, topping off the tank while Eli stretched his legs. The townspeople watched them, not with fear, but with the quiet curiosity reserved for outsiders in places too small for strangers to blend. At a diner across the street, Chuck nodded toward the windows. "We'll eat here." Eli hesitated. He wasn't used to being looked at without suspicion. He wasn't sure he ever would be again. "You sure?" he asked. Chuck simply opened the door and walked inside. Bessie padded along beside him. "And Eli?" He followed. "Because that's what you did when someone gave you a second chance. You didn't question it." You walked through the door. Inside, the diner was warm with the smells of coffee and frying bacon. A few heads turned as Chuck led them to a booth by the window. The waitress approached, notepad in hand, her smile genuine but guarded. "What can I get you folks?" Chuck ordered coffee, eggs, and toast. Eli just stared at the menu like it was a foreign language. The waitress noticed. "First time out in a while?" she asked gently. Eli nodded. She softened. "Start with pancakes. Always helps." He smiled. A real smile, small but alive. "Pancakes it is." As they ate, Chuck kept an eye on the door, on the kitchen, on the streets outside. Old habits. Eli noticed. "You always on guard?" Chuck sipped his coffee. "Freedom's fragile," he said. "You don't get to relax just because you made it through the gate." Eli nodded slowly. That was the truth no one told you. Getting out was just the first battle. Living after was the war. After breakfast, they walked Bessie in the little park behind the diner. A few kids played catch near the swings. An old man fed pigeons by the fountain. It could have been any town, any day. Normal. Safe. And for a moment, Eli let himself believe he could fit here. Start fresh. Maybe open a repair shop. Maybe rent a room over the diner. Maybe live. But that moment shattered when a black SUV pulled into the lot. Fast. Too fast for this sleepy town. Chuck's eyes narrowed. He stepped in front of Eli instinctively, one hand resting on his belt. Not reaching for a weapon, but ready all the same. The SUV door opened. Two men in suits stepped out. Federal types. Chuck recognized the cut of their suits, the nervous set of their jaws. Not here for breakfast. Here for them. "Mr. Norris." "Mr. Walker," one said. Eli tensed. Chuck didn't move. "You're coming with us." "Who sent you?" Chuck asked calmly. The lead agent flashed a badge. Department of Internal Corrections. Chuck's eyes darkened. Not the real federal government. Not a court order. Internal sweepers. Damage control. The kind of men who cleaned up after mistakes by erasing the people who remembered them. "You're under protective custody," the agent said. "For your own safety." Chuck gave a slow, cold smile. "No, we're not." Without warning, he moved. One step forward. One sharp, deliberate shove. The agent stumbled back, reaching for his belt. Chuck grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and the gun clattered to the sidewalk. Before the second agent could react, Chuck planted a boot squarely against the side of his knee, folding him like a tent. Gasps erupted from the park. Parents pulled their kids back. Chuck stood over the fallen men. "Tell whoever sent you," he said, voice like iron, "that Eli Walker walks free, or they'll answer to me." The men groaned on the ground. Chuck turned to Eli. "Get Bessie. We're leaving." And together, they disappeared down the side street, vanishing into the maze of alleys and open fields beyond the town. Hours later, they found themselves at a crumbling barn on the edge of an abandoned farm. Safe for now. Inside, dust floated in thick beams of light. Bessie curled up on a pile of hay. Chuck worked on patching the radiator of the truck, while Eli sat cross-legged nearby, thinking. Finally, Eli broke the silence. "You didn't have to fight for me," he said. "You could have walked away." Chuck didn't look up. "Could have," he said. "Why didn't you?" Chuck tightened a bolt. "Because someone once stood up for me when no one else would. Didn't ask if I deserved it. Didn't ask what it would cost him." He wiped his hands on a rag. "He just showed up." Eli studied him. "You knew my dad, didn't you?" Chuck nodded. "He was one of the best." Eli swallowed hard. All this time, he had carried the shame of failing his father's name. But Chuck's words told a different story. The blood he carried wasn't stained beyond saving. It still meant something. That night, they built a fire outside the barn. Eli sat close, soaking in the warmth. Chuck leaned back against a tree, eyes on the stars. "You'll have to move," Chuck said. "Where?" "Doesn't matter. Small town, big city, doesn't matter. What matters is what you do when you get there. And what's that? Chuck stared into the flames. You live. You build something. You find people worth fighting for. He paused. And you don't forget where you came from. Eli nodded. I won't. They sat in silence again, the fire crackling between them. Above them, the stars stretched wide, cold and brilliant. Freedom wasn't easy. It wasn't clean, but it was theirs, and it was worth fighting for. Every single day, at dawn, Chuck dropped Eli off at a bus station 2 counties over. They stood by the curb, the early morning mist curling around their feet. Eli carried a small duffel, no more than a few changes of clothes and a battered photo of his father. And Bessie, leashed and ready, tail wagging nervously. Chuck handed him a folded piece of paper. A friend of mine runs a mechanic shop upstate. Name's Deke. Tell him I sent you. He'll give you a job, a place to stay. Eli took the paper with trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you. Chuck rested a hand on his shoulder, firm, steady. Don't thank me. Prove me right. Eli nodded, fighting the lump in his throat. The bus roared into the station. Passengers shuffled on. Eli looked back one last time. Chuck gave him a single nod, then turned and walked away into the rising sun. No goodbyes, no promises, just trust, and a future waiting to be built. As the bus pulled away, Eli settled into his seat, Bessie curling up beside him. He watched the countryside roll past. And for the first time in a very, very long time, he smiled, because no matter where he was going forward. Back at the abandoned barn, long after Chuck had driven off, 2 figures approached the cold ashes of the fire. Government men, looking for someone. One bent down, sifting the ash through his fingers. He looked up at his partner and said, We're not done yet. Not by a long shot. And somewhere far down the endless road, Chuck Norris already knew they were coming, and he was ready. The horizon burned gold as the day died behind the hills, casting long shadows across the old country roads. Chuck Norris drove steadily, the battered truck bouncing gently over potholes. There was no rush in his movements, no panic, but he knew. He could feel it in the air. The hunt had restarted. He wasn't just protecting Eli anymore. Now he was drawing fire, on purpose. Miles behind him, on a dusty back road, a black government SUV followed at a distance. 2 men sat inside, grim-faced, scanning every turn Chuck made. He's not running, the younger one muttered. He's drawing us out, the older agent said. The younger cursed under his breath. Why would he do that? The older man didn't answer, because deep down, they both knew. You don't chase Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris lets you catch up, only so he can decide what happens next. Meanwhile, far from the chase, Eli and Bessie had reached a small mountain town called Red Hollow. Population, 742. No cameras, no news vans, no easy roads in or out. Exactly the kind of place Chuck had sent him to find. At the edge of town, Eli found the garage Chuck had mentioned, a crooked building with an old faded sign. Deke's Auto Repair. Inside, a tall, wiry man with grease-stained hands and sharp blue eyes looked up as Eli entered. For a long moment, they just studied each other. Then Deke grinned. You're the kid Chuck sent. Eli nodded nervously. Name's Eli. Deke tossed him a dirty rag. You know how to turn a wrench? A little. Good enough. We'll teach you the rest. No questions. No judgment. Just a place to start again. Back on the highway, Chuck finally turned off onto a secluded dirt road leading into the woods. He parked under a canopy of ancient trees and killed the engine. Silence swallowed him. He didn't move for a long time. He just sat there listening, waiting. The SUV appeared minutes later, headlights slicing through the dusk. Chuck smiled faintly. Right on time. The agent stepped out carefully, weapons at their sides but not drawn. Not yet. Chuck Norris, the older one, called out. We need you to come with us. This doesn't have to be messy. Chuck opened the truck door and stepped down. Boots crunching gravel. No fear in his movements. Only inevitability. You don't want this, Chuck said quietly. The younger agent raised his weapon a little higher. Orders are orders. Chuck tilted his head. Bad orders. You don't get to decide that, the younger snapped. No, Chuck said, voice calm. but I get to decide what happens next. Without warning, Chuck moved, faster than their eyes could track. He grabbed the younger agent's wrist, twisting the gun free, and spun him into the side of the SUV with a heavy thud. The older agent stepped back, hands raised. Chuck pointed the stolen gun at him. "Drop it." The agent obeyed. Slowly, carefully, Chuck kicked both weapons into the dirt. "I'm not your enemy," Chuck said, voice low. "But if you're here to clean up Kessler's mess, you're standing on the wrong side of history." The older agent swallowed hard. "We didn't know," he admitted. "They just told us." Norris was interfering with national security. Chuck laughed once, a hard, humorless sound. "Truth isn't a threat unless you're hiding something." He stepped back, lowering the gun slightly. "Walk away," he said. "We can't." "Then tell them you never found me." The older man hesitated, then nodded. "Good luck, Norris." Chuck handed the gun back, but first, no fear, no anger, just certainty. The agents climbed back into the SUV and drove off, slower this time. Not defeated, but changed. Chuck stood alone beneath the trees, listening to the silence settle again. The system might be corrupted, but not everyone it was lost. Some still had a choice, and some were starting to make the right one. The next morning, Eli scrubbed oil off his hands with gritty soap at the repair shop sink. Bessie lay under the counter, chewing happily on an old leather glove Deke had given her. Deke walked over, handing Eli a glass of water. "You're doing good work, kid." Eli smiled shyly. "Thanks." Deke leaned against the counter. "You're looking over your shoulder a lot." Eli stiffened. Deke shrugged. "You're allowed. Doesn't make you weak. Makes you smart." He sipped his coffee. "Only thing you gotta remember is keep moving forward. Doesn't matter how slow. Just forward." Eli nodded. "I'm trying." Deke grinned. "Then you're already winning." That night, in a battered motel miles away, Chuck checked the burner phone he kept for emergencies. No missed calls. No texts. Exactly how he liked it. He leaned back in the chair, stretching tired muscles. For now, Eli was safe. Bessie was happy. Kessler was behind bars. And Chuck, he was where he always ended up, in the spaces between battles. Waiting, watching, ready, because men like him didn't chase peace. They protected it, no matter the cost. At the edge of the motel parking lot, a payphone rang. Chuck's head snapped up. No one used payphones anymore. He stood slowly and walked toward it. The phone kept ringing, shrill against the quiet night. He lifted the receiver. "Yeah." A familiar voice answered, low, cautious. "Dana." "Chuck, you're going to want to hear this." "Go on." "Kessler isn't the only one. They're the list." Chuck's grip tightened on the phone. "How long?" 23 names. Judges. Wardens. Lawyers. All connected. All dirty. Chuck closed his eyes. Of course there was more. It was never just one man. One cell. One battle. It was a whole war. And it was only just beginning. Chuck hung up the phone, rolled his shoulders back, and smiled. Not the smile of a man who was tired, but the smile of a man who was ready. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and pulled a tattered old map from the glove box. One by one, he marked the names. One by one, he drew the lines between them. Because some men fight to survive. But men like Chuck Norris fight to make sure the innocent never have to fight alone again. And the next town on the map was already waiting. Chuck hung up the phone, rolled his shoulders back, and smiled. Not the smile of a man who was tired, but the smile of a man who was ready. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and pulled a tattered old map from the glove box. One by one, he marked the names. One by one, he drew the lines between them. Because some men fight to survive. But men like Chuck Norris fight to make sure the innocent never have to fight alone again. And the next town on the map was already waiting. The dawn broke over the hills in a pale wash of gold and silver, chasing the last of the night's chill away. Chuck Norris sat behind the wheel of his truck, the battered map open on the passenger seat. Each name circled, each route planned. One by one, justice would come for them, just like it came for Kessler. But not today. Today was different. Today was about beginnings, not endings. In Red Hollow, Eli Walker stepped off the porch of Deke's garage, wiping grease from his hands. Bessie trotted beside him, leash dangling loosely from Eli's wrist. Across the street, the local bakery was setting out fresh loaves. A group of teenagers kicked a soccer ball through the dusty lot. A woman laughed at something her daughter said, sunlight catching her hair. It was just life. Ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful. Eli watched it all, hands in his pockets. He could feel it, the temptation to hide, to run from the past. But Chuck's words echoed in his mind. You don't have to forget where you came from. You just have to choose where you're going. That afternoon, Chuck parked a few blocks down, away from the main street. No grand entrance. No drawn-out goodbye. He watched from his shadows as Eli worked on a truck engine, laughing when Deke teased him for dropping a wrench. Bessie barked once and wagged her tail like she knew Chuck was near. Chuck smiled, a rare, true smile. This was how it was supposed to be. Not fireworks. Not revenge. Just a life rebuilt piece by piece, day by day. The real victory was quiet, but no less powerful. Chuck pulled a battered envelope from his jacket pocket and scrawled a note on the back. He walked to the door of the garage, unnoticed, and tucked it into the mail slot. Then he turned without a word and walked back to his truck. Inside the envelope was a single, worn dollar bill and a note. One day, when you're ready, pay it forward. Chuck. Back in his truck, Chuck started the engine. The rumble stirred a few leaves on the street, but no heads turned. That's how he liked it. Invisible. Uncelebrated. Necessary. He pulled onto the open road just as the first stars began to flicker into life overhead. Far behind him, Eli found the envelope hours later. He read the note twice, smiled, folded it carefully into his wallet. No fanfare, no promises, just a quiet understanding that he was part of something bigger now. Not a victim, not a prisoner, a guardian in his own way. The first brick of a life built on second chances. Chuck drove through the endless dark, headlights carving tunnels through the mist. He didn't know exactly where the road would take him next. A crooked judge, a lying warden, a corrupt official. It didn't matter. As long as there was injustice, there would be work to do. And Chuck Norris was never out of work. The camera pans upward, pulling away from the winding road and the lone truck rumbling across it. Out across the vastness of America. 1,000 little towns waiting. 1,000 wrongs waiting to be made right. And somewhere out there, a legend rides. Quiet. Unstoppable. Chuck Norris.